of the first unit, and she scheduled that strategically to follow the district PD that ARC will be doing as a, for the whole school. So she's having the coach who's going to be assigned to her school then come to work with her teachers specifically to really break it down even further. So you'll see that that has been added. And the principal of Central is very familiar with ARC as he used it in his last school and he saw a great success with it. So he decided to purchase the School Pace online data management system because he wants to really focus on maintaining student data, setting instructional goals, and monitoring student growth more objectively. So he's using that in one of his ELL classes, along with PD for his teachers on how to use it. So this is all of that for the total of $3,791,645.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Brooks, for the overview. Any questions by school board members?
I have no questions, Madam Chair.
Mr. Thomas, thank you. Mr. Ibiemi, any questions?
I have no question, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. I think this was a pretty straightforward contract for us to review. As I mentioned prior to Ms. Brooks's additional context for the contract, our school is making a significant investment in the American Reading Company for our K through 8, and we're looking at high school initiatives as well. And when we first passed our budget, we had contemplated not only the initial investments, but there would be subsequent investments to make sure that we are purchasing the entirety of the curriculum to roll out for all grades in all units. And so we anticipate more of this happening. So I don't really have any additional questions other than I am glad to see that we are figuring out how to put the dollars behind the intent of us bringing in a viable curriculum that we hope will set Providence on a path to higher educational attainment for our students. So with that, I'm going to ask for a motion to recommend.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Ibiemi.
It's been seconded by Mr. Ibiemi. If there's no further questions by the school board, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? The ayes carry. So we will consider this for full passage or full recommendation at Wednesday's board meeting. All right, the next item on the agenda is the Center for Collaborative Classroom. And who from the district will be presenting on this contract?
That will be me again, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks.
Okay, so Center for Collaborative Classroom provides the SIPS program, which stands for Systematic Instruction in Phonological Awareness and Phonics. It is a Tier 3 intervention program that focuses very much on phonological work for students having extreme difficulties in learning to read. Many have dyslexia or other severe reading situations where they need very intensive work. So this contract is for $32,808, and it is largely for professional learning, and the items that will be needed, you'll see that they're all listed there for teachers to do the required work with the students. They selected this because it is rated very highly, also on ED reports, but in addition to that, what many of the schools liked about it is that the reading that the students do also addresses culturally responsive topics and social and emotional learning topics. So not only are they learning and improving their phonological awareness, but the stories that they're reading have a lot to do with how children treat each other, how people in the community should regard each other, etc.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. Questions by the school board?
I have no questions, Madam Chair.
Mr. Ibiemi, any questions?
I have no question, Madam Chair.
Okay, if there are no questions, I will entertain a motion to recommend the Center for Collaborative Classroom contract for $32,808.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Ibiemi. If there's no further questions or comments by the school board, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes carry. Again, like all of our contracts tonight, if they are passed for recommendation, they will be on the school board agenda for Wednesday. The next item, the next contract for approval is the College Board contract. And who from the district would like to present on this?
That will be me again, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks.
Yes, I'd like to present a contract in the amount of $109,055.96 for a College Board's Springboard program, which is a high school ELA core product. These schools are repurchasing it. They have been using it for several years, and they decided to continue to use it at this point. You'll see outlined that it includes the print materials, the digital work that is required, which will be very helpful if we do any distance learning work this upcoming year, and also for professional development for schools as well.
Ms. Brooks, just a question, and more for a point of clarification. I know that we've spent a significant amount of time over the last several months talking about viable curriculum, high standard curriculums, and I know that we've been talking about ed reports being the kind of gatekeeper or arbiter of what high quality looks like. Where does this fall in that space? I know that we've been spending a lot of time on ARC, and so I'm curious how this matches up or compares in terms of quality.
This also is listed on green as green on ed reports. If you like, I can add that onto the school board summary for Wednesday if you would like, excerpts from ed reports, but it does rate as green on it. We were only allowed to
select from those. Correct. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
I assumed that, but I wanted to validate and verify that before we go ahead and ask for a recommendation.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Any questions by the school board members?
I have no further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Ibiemi, any questions from you? Did we lose Mr. Ibiemi?
It looks like he might be logging on
Okay,
to the video.
got it. Mr. Ibiemi, I'm not sure if you could hear us. I see that you're trying to log in through, it looks like your computer at this point. Okay, so I'm going to hold for a vote. So this one has not been motioned. And let us move on to the information for the next contract while Mr. Ibiemi rejoins our conversation. The next item is the Reading Plus contract. Ms. Brooks, is this you as well?
Yes, Madam Chair, it is.
Okay, and Ms. Brooks, I am just going to ask for any of the contracts for any of the department leads that are here tonight, if you could just also validate where these rank on those ed reports again, because I know that that is something that has been discussed at length in public, and I know that that's something that people care about. So again, same question will apply to all of the contracts. So Ms. Brooks, over to you.
Yes, again, we were only allowed to select from the green level on the contract.
Ms. Brooks, I think you've been muted. Let us unmute you. Give me one moment, please.
There
you go.
I tapped the button myself. Did you hear
Okay.
anything I just said? No.
We did not, other than you were only able to select from the green
Okay.
level curriculums from ed reports. And so again, want to make sure that that's abundantly clear.
Yes, Madam Chair. Okay, so this is for Reading Plus, the amount of $99,630. Reading Plus is an intervention program in ELA for middle and high. It's a program that we have used for a number of years now, quite a few years, and these schools are repeating the purchase of the program. It is a digital program, and you'll see that the charts here are for the digital licenses and for professional development.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. And I just want to, for a point of clarification, so is Bishop, I know that we were purchasing ARC for elementaries and some middle schools as well, correct? And I see that Bishop is, I believe, the only middle school that is selected to go with Reading Plus. Is this I just want to make sure I understand this. ARC and Reading Plus would both be ELA curriculums with the standards that we're looking for in the district. Is that correct in saying that?
Yes, Reading Plus is strictly an intervention. So
Okay, that's
it's
what I
not-
wanted clarification on. So it is an intervention model, but Bishop is also going with ARC as their universal curriculum. Is that correct?
Yes, at this time, Bishop was using ARC for grade 6 only due to budget issues. But just as of Thursday, the superintendent has decided to go with full implementation in those middle schools that were not able to have the funds to put it together before.
Right, and so the funding has been made available for all of our elementary and middle schools to universally apply the ARC curriculum. And so Reading Plus, in the case of Bishop, it is an intervention, and so this would be a supplemental curriculum. Is that my understanding?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, I just wanted to have that as a point of clarification because I know this can get very confusing when you're looking at multiple ELA curriculums and how they weave in together. And I'm assuming that this intervention does have the ability to kind of seamlessly integrate with ARC, correct? So again, ARC would be the universal, this would be the
That's correct.
intervention.
ARC is the core. That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Additional questions by school board members?
I have no further questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, no questions for Mr. Thomas. Mr. Ibiemi, are you back with us? I know you were having some technical difficulties.
Yes, I have no question. I have to jump back from the phone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Thank you, Mr. Ibiemi. So here's what we're
Yeah.
going to do. If there's no further questions on the board, I'm actually going to ask for a motion to recommend passage of Reading Plus, which is the contract that is before us, and then we will go back to the contract prior to this. So is there a motion to recommend Reading Plus?
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been moved by
Second.
Mr. Thomas. It's been seconded by Mr. Ibiemi. If there's no further questions, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes carry. So I will go back. I know that Mr. Thomas, you had made a motion to recommend the College Board contract. Mr. Ibiemi, is there a second from you on College Board, or did you have any questions? Because I know that that is when your phone was going in and out.
No, I don't have any question. It's second that motion.
Fantastic. Okay, so the motion has been made and seconded. If there's no further questions by the school board, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes carry. Okay, great. So we will now move on to our next contract, which is the Wilson Language Training contract.
And that
Ms.
is
Brooks, is
Madam
this
Chair. Yes, it is.
fantastic? Okay,
Okay, so the Wilson Language Training is also a very intensive phonological intervention program. Tier 3, it is designed particularly for students who have dyslexia and who need additional severe intervention outside of ARC, outside of what ARC will be providing as the core. The contract is for professional development for the amount of $6,500, and these 4 schools are, you'll see that they are chipping in each $1,625 per school to send a total of 28 to 30 teachers to the training that they will be going to learn how to work with the students in this method of intervention.
great, thank you. More is just a point of clarification on this, and Mr. Patisi, I don't know if Mr. Patisi is on the call. If not, Mr. Scott can maybe chime in on this. I know that we had talked about the school finance committee approving contracts over a certain threshold, and this clearly falls under the threshold that we had talked about in one of our previous meetings. Is this, and Ms. Brooks, you might be able to answer this, is this another one of those contracts where we already have an existing relationship and this is going to put it over that threshold? Or is there a reason why? I'm happy to vote on this. I'm just curious from a point of clarification.
This is Director of Purchasing Molly Hannon. I'm happy to answer that question. I don't see that
Hi, Ms. Hannon.
that Chris
Hi.
is on here. Hello. This is actually an award that is being made through an RFP that went through our old procurement process through the Board
Got
of
it.
Contract and Supply. So that's why this dollar value is under that 200K threshold. I think that there are a couple that we're going to look at tonight that are like that.
I just wanted to make sure that we understood why we were hearing some of these contracts. I know with some of the other ones, there's largers and there's, I know some have been, previously vetted. So I wasn't sure when I saw some of the smaller value contracts. So thank you, Ms. Hannon, for that explanation. Okay, any questions by the school board?
No further questions, Madam Chair.
There are no questions from Mr. Thomas. Mr. Ibianimi, any questions from you?
No
Okay.
question from me then.
Motion to recommend?
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas, seconded by Mr. Ibianimi. If there's no further questions, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes carry. The next contract is IXL Learning.
Madam Chair, this is Ernest Cox, and I will be presenting the next 3 contracts.
Fantastic. Thank you and welcome.
Yes, the IXL Learning Company is for a math intervention tiered support. This is a scaled down version. We had quite a few schools who used it last year, but because of the changeover, 3 schools said they would like to continue, and that's Classical, E-Cubed, and JSEC at an amount of $12,100.
Great, thank you. Any questions by school board members on this contract?
I do have one quick question, Madam Chair. I'm wondering, Mr. Cox, if there was any data that was collected with regards to the contract. And if so, would that be available to the board? I know the school year was cut short, but I'm just curious if there was any data collected.
The impact statement from last year is attached.
Is it? Okay.
And it shows
It is.
8,000 plus students who participated, and it's about a 12 to 15% increase for those kids who applied themselves to the program.
Very good. Thank you.
Additional questions by the board?
No question
Okay.
from my side.
If there are no additional questions, I'll entertain a motion to recommend.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Ibianimi. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes carry. Mr. Cox, iSafe Enterprise. You're on.
iSafe Enterprise is a sole vendor that collects information for our E-rate. We have used them in the past, but only as a provider of lessons where students would go to the library and the librarian or their classroom teacher would present lessons, and then the teacher would click saying that X number of students had viewed the 3 lessons that are required each year. Well, what this is iSafe on steroids. Now, each student will log into a computer themselves and take the lesson so we can keep track of every individual student. This program also now allows us to do to put up our acceptable use policy. Everything will be tracked electronically. There will be no more collection of papers. Also, this program allows us to do permission slips all online and all parental consent forms online, and gives us an up-to-date compliance analysis of any kinds of report, especially as it relates to the E-rate, which is controls monies that we get for computers for our district. And it's for $24,000. Typically, this program is $5 per student, but I did my number with them. I said, hey, we don't have that kind of money. And so we're getting it for $1 per student. So it's $24,000.
Thank you. I noticed the hefty discount on this contract, and that brought a smile to my face. So thank you very much for crying poverty in the district, so that we could try to negotiate some of these contracts down. All right, questions by school board members?
No further questions, Madam Chair.
Mr. Ibianimi, any questions?
No question at this time.
If there are no further questions, I'll entertain a motion to recommend.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas, seconded
Second.
by Mr. Ibianimi. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, any abstentions? The ayes carry. The next contract for consideration is Rosetta Stone. Mr. Cox?
I'm presenting to you a contract in the amount of $67,117.50 for Rosetta Stone. As per the school board request last year, we combined all of our Rosetta Stone products into one contract. So you'll see Alvarez listed there 3 times, but that's one for Italian, and then one for our Newcomer Academy, and then the MLL students, the L students that are at Alvarez itself, and then all of the other schools. The threshold for licenses is $1,000 At $1,000, if this price would drop to $75 per license, but at 785 license, it's $85.50 per license. This contract is a volume contract, so the more licenses you get, the cheaper Rosetta Stone becomes.
Got it. Well, I want to thank you for consolidating this into one contract. It's just easier to see how much the total investment is here. All right, questions by the school board?
No further questions.
Okay.
None
Mr.
at this
Biemi,
time,
any
Madam
questions? Okay. If
No
there's no
questions.
questions, I'll entertain a motion to recommend the Rosetta Stone contract for passage.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas, seconded by
Mr. Biemi, second.
Mr. Ibiemi. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes carry. The next contract that we have is the McGraw-Hill contract. And who do we have from the district to present on this contract? McGraw-Hill Education.
It is me.
Donna Casanova. Okay.
Casanova.
Ms. Casanova, how are you tonight?
Good, Madam Chair. How are you?
Nice to see you.
Okay. So I'd like to talk to you about McGraw-Hill. This again is, we put a bunch of material, resources from McGraw-Hill together. So it covers it covers science, it covers ELA, math. So there's we combine the contracts. The total of this contract is $275,484.28. That being said, funding came from Title I, Local, CCP, and Title II. The products are Alex, which speaks to online assessment, management, and data collection. And that is around the illustrative math. McGraw-Hill is green and in Ed reports. Study Sync, we removed from the middle schools because we're pushing for the ARC to begin with, K through 8. High schools will continue to use Study Sync until next year, which they'll move to ARC. Glencoe Science, the middle school sciences have been using McGraw-Hill since 2008 and will continue to do so until such materials are suggested by the state and Ed reports with the commissioner and so on. That's coming in 2023. I see Say is for English language learners, and it is happening at Alvarez. They are receiving those newcomer students. The impact statements indicate that students that use these resources over 20 hours, there's significant gains, an average of 12% towards mastery when used over 20 hours. So that's history. Is there anything else?
Thank you, Ms. Casanova. Questions by the school board?
I have no questions, Madam Chair.
No questions for Mr. Thomas. Mr. Ibiemi, any questions?
I have no question, Madam Chair.
Okay, if there's no questions, I will entertain a motion to recommend.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas, seconded
Second.
by Mr. Ibiemi. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, any abstentions? The ayes carry. The next contract before us is Edulog. Ms. Cassidy, is this yours as well, or? No, this is Ms. McCrate, right?
Yep, this is mine, Cheryl McCrate.
Hi, how are you?
Good evening. So this is a one-year renewal for Edulog, which is our routing software for our yellow bus service, which creates the bus runs and places the students on the bus stops. So
Pretty straightforward.
pretty straightforward.
Yep. So are there any questions by the school? We need to get our kids to school. We need them routed properly. Any
Absolutely.
questions by our school board members?
No questions here, Madam Chair.
Mr. Ibiemi, any questions on your part? I believe you're on mute.
No question on my part, Madam Chair.
Okay, motion to recommend.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed, any abstentions? The ayes have it. Next, we have the school food service program for Sodexo. Is Mr. Cambio with us tonight, or who's presenting on the food service contract?
I don't see Mr. Cambio on there. This is Molly Hannon again. I'm happy to speak to this.
Thank you, Ms. Hannon. It's all yours.
All right, so this is grant funded. It was a grant awarded to the district from the New England Dairy and Food Council in the amount of about $40,000. The purpose of the grant was to increase access to a low-fat and fat-free dairy products. Sodexo provided the goods and services associated with this work. They have the right of first refusal for any projects associated with our food service program. I believe that this may have been work that was completed back in March in the amount of $40,000.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Hannon. Any questions by the school board?
No questions here, Madam Chair.
Mr. Abiemi, any questions? Mr. Abiemi, I believe you're on mute.
No question, Madam Chair. I did not mute it. Maybe Shannon muted me.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes. All right, so motion to recommend.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Abiemi. All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes carry. Next is the Otis elevator contract. Ms. Hannon, are you presenting on this as well?
I am happy to. So
Wonderful.
this is a great example of some things that you might see going forward. So this is actually a change order to an existing contract. Otis Elevator provides inspections, maintenance, and repair to our elevators throughout the district. We had originally awarded this contract about a year ago in the amount of $72,000 for inspections. We ultimately then awarded the first change order, which was processed through the Board of Contract and Supply for $45,000. Change order 2 was for additional repairs. We're looking here at change order 3. It is looking to add another $4,400 to cover further repairs and maintenance that were completed during FY20. And that would then close out that contract and would be the full amount spent by the district for elevator maintenance, inspections, and repairs in FY20 with Otis.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Hannon. Any questions by the school board members?
No questions, Madam Chair.
All right. If there are no questions, I'm sorry, Mr. Abiemi?
No question on my part, too.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no questions by the school board, motion to recommend.
So moved.
It's been made by Mr. Thomas, seconded by Mr. Abiemi. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes carry. The next contract that we have is Catapult Learning, and this is the tutorial services, I believe, correct? And who do we have in the district that wants to present on this contract?
I am happy to speak to this, Madam Chair. Let me pull this up really quickly. So this was a contract that was awarded last year to Catapult Learning to provide tutoring services throughout the district. I believe that historically this was done either managed within PPSD or we hired a fairly large number of different providers to provide these tutoring services. It is a unit price, so it's, I believe, $54.39 an hour. $48.49 an hour. And these will be providing tutoring services to non-public schools throughout the district.
Thank you, Ms. Hannon. So that's what I just wanted to make sure that this was for those non-publics, correct?
That is correct.
And so this is where our district federal dollars are passed through for the privates. I wanted to just confirm that. All right, and so,
Madam,
I see
Yeah.
Deb Generali.
okay,
Madam Chair, it's Deb Generali. I just want to
How are you?
add to that this is just those schools that participate in the Title I federal funding.
yes, that's what so I saw a few title funds here, so I wasn't sure. So it's the Title I district schools, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Ms. Generali, I appreciate that. And welcome, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, I didn't recognize you with your long hair.
No. The beauty of COVID, it just keeps getting longer, right? That's right. All right, so are there any questions by our school board members?
No questions, Madam Chair, at this time.
I
Mr.
have no
Biemi, no
question either.
questions? Okay, great. Motion to recommend?
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Biemi. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None.
Any opposed, any abstentions? The ayes carry. Next is the Andrews Technology approval, which is for our Novatime time and attendance system. And who from the district would like to present on this? I know it had Mr. Patisi's name, but I do not believe he's here with us. Mr. Scott, is this you or?
Yeah, I can take it. I may need help potentially from Molly or Deb, but I think this is a pretty straightforward one. So this is to implement our time and attendance, our Novatime tap card system. It's also been what we've been using in distance as we've been remote. It has a web functionality that allows people to sign in and log their time. So that's what we've been using while we've been in distance learning. So this is, I believe, I can't remember exactly when it was installed, but we had a number of pieces of hardware installed, and this is the software to support our tap card and time and attendance system.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Scott. Any questions by the school board members?
No questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Biemi, no questions from you, I take it? I'm going to take that as a no. Motion to recommend?
No question from my side. Yes.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas. Mr. Biemi, are you seconding?
Second, yes.
Fantastic. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, any abstentions? The ayes carry. And I remember all of the time that we put into demoing Novatime when we set up all the systems. Ms. Generali, do you remember that? All those meetings that we did. So I'm glad that we're using it fully. I know that there were some initial hesitations about this as well. So I'm glad to see that our investments haven't gone to waste on this. All right. So I'm just trying to see here. I believe that concluded our report on contracts. And we are now going to move to, we have two presentations on the agenda tonight. The first is our CRP presentation. Mr. Scott, are you kicking us off and then you're bringing in team members for us?
Yeah, I'll walk through it, and I may ask Deb for Deb's help as well. I think traditionally this has been kind of a partnership with teaching and learning and finance, given the heavy focus on academics for the CRP. But this is my first time, but I think something we do every year in terms of providing an update on our consolidated resource plan. So for the CRP, for those who don't know, is our consolidated resource plan, and includes, we'll go into some of the more details in future slides, but our funding largely from our federal dollars that go above and beyond our local budget. So our goal today is to talk through kind of an overview of that CRP, what the FY21 allocations look like across the different titles, kind of the budget development process, as well as some of the highlights of the budget, as well as any questions that people have at the end. So I think we can move through most of this and leave ample time for questions. So as I mentioned, the CRP includes federal funds that are included in ESSA that are things that people are fairly familiar with in terms of Title I through Title IV, as well as the IDEA special education focused grants. This funding is used to enhance, with the phrase that most people are familiar with, which is supplement, not supplant. So these dollars are meant to enhance and provide additional supports in certain programmatic areas above and beyond what we're already spending out of our local budget. And so these are the CRPs developed in consultation with stakeholders, both in schools and in the community. So on the next slide, just to highlight a few of the pillars of our turnaround action plan that help guide how we developed our CRP. So 1 is engage communities, 2 is excellence in learning, 3 is world-class talent, and then 4th is kind of a cut across, which is efficient district system. So, as we think of how we make investments and spend money, whether it's local dollars or our CRP, the turnaround action plan is top of mind to making sure that we are investing appropriately. So if we scroll to the next slide, this just shows you some of the how the CRP is broken down. As you'll see, Title I is by far the biggest source of funds. Over half of funds come from Title I, and that is for targeted at supporting the achievement and enhancing the achievement of our disadvantaged students. IDEA is the next biggest, which is targeted primarily at special education. And then to a lesser extent, we have funding in Title II, which is teacher quality, Title III, which focuses on supporting our multilingual learners, and then Title IV, which is on student support and academic achievement, and includes a mix of some professional development as well. So one thing I just want to note here, I think if the increase for next year is about 2.5%, which is somewhat average to what we've seen in the past. Last year was a little bit lower in terms of the year-over-year increase. The year over that, it was slightly higher than 2.5%. This is a fund that typically grows at a fairly low rate compared to some of the expenses that sit on it. So it's one that in many years anytime we are adding something in, we are needing to find and assess what's working and remove things if they aren't supporting this. So across these funds, we have a mix of programs and staff that are funded out of these allocations.
Mr. Scott, can I just ask a question? The title allocations, and we may or may not know this, but any of the CARES Act money that's been designated for schools to assist with COVID-19 and reopening of schools, do they have a separate line item? Do we categorize that? Which I'm assuming is yes, so it doesn't necessarily fall under these title buckets. And at some point, would that roll up into our consolidated plan, or would that just be a separate set aside because it really is these one-time use funds and we don't want to conflate it with our regularly budgeted line items?
Yeah, Deb, you can correct me. I think of that as a separate application. So we are for the stimulus funds, we have to submit a separate application outside of this. So it is, and there's different restrictions or guidelines on what's allowable and not. But that is something separate than what is in our CRP.
Okay, I just wanted to validate that because those things make me a little nervous when they have these one-time funds and how we're allocating them. And so sure. I just wanted to make sure that we should not be seeing that encroach upon just what is our foundational federal funding opportunities. Okay, thank you.
Right. So here, just to highlight some of how this budget development process has gone, like I mentioned, we use the TAP, the Turnaround Action Plan, and the Superintendent's Vision as our anchor for how we prioritize. We work with schools as they're developing their individual school budgets aligned to their school improvement plans. And for schools that receive the SIG funds, the school improvement grants, they're working closely with their community advisory boards. So this will be submitted in July. For substantial approval, and Deb can correct me on this, but my understanding is that is getting preliminary approval for RIDE for spending on items as that review of our CRP is in process. Is that accurate, Deb? I think you're on mute, Deb. Deb, you may be muted. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we have not heard back from RIDE on the preliminary approval, but that's the process that we're going through right now, yes.
Got it. Understood. Okay. If we move to the next slide, just to highlight again some of the items and areas of investment that are aligned with the Turnaround Action Plan pillars. So one is tools and technology for parent and community engagement. So that is some of the Kinvo and other technology that we are using to work with parents. For excellence in learning, some of what we heard tonight around the whether it's professional development or some of the technology associated with ARC or other technologies, was made possible and support in part because of the support through this, as well as some curriculum focused on multilingual learners. So very much aligned to our excellence in learning and getting high quality curriculum in our schools. World-class talent that supports will be supporting our reimbursement, or part of that funding will be supported philanthropically, but the other portion will be supported for teachers seeking their ESL reimbursement through, I believe it's our Title II funds here. And we're also using some of these dollars to support our Teach for America contract in increasing the pipeline in high need areas. Lastly, and this just it kind of goes across the board, you know, the CRP is a big source of discretionary funds for our schools. So it's a way that we have you know, schools can help align their instructional priorities with the district using the funds provided. So the CRP is a fairly significant source for our schools in terms of funding investments that they need.
Great, thank you, Mr. Scott. Questions by school board members?
I have no questions
At this time, Madam Chair.
Okay, pretty straightforward. I think this is something that we're used to seeing. As Mr. Scott mentioned, it does get presented to the board. The numbers have been pretty static, pretty consistent for a few years now. Was hoping that we'd see some increases, but it doesn't seem likely. So if there's no questions or comments by the school board, I do not believe that this is an action item. It was just for presentation. And I believe it gets presented to the full board as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so we will see this again as a full board. Mr. Scott, thank you for this. The next presentation that we have, which I believe does require action, is the local budget presentation and the ordinances that go along with the approved or appropriated budget. So Mr. Scott, I'm going to turn this over to you again.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me back. This is a look at our proposed FY21 budget. So if you'll recall, I guess it'd be several weeks or months prior, we had met to talk about different scenarios that we were considering given the kind of financial uncertainty that we were in. While we have not received kind of assigned FY21 dollar amount from the state and therefore the city, we still have a plan that we are now implementing, assuming that we are level funded. So right now, our kind of budget and spending plan that we'll talk through and what our ordinances are aligned to is a scenario in which the district does not receive any additional funding, and that state and city funding are level. Certainly, if if that changes, by that I mean if the state provides additional funding, or if they're in a worst case scenario where the state actually reduces funding, then we would actually obviously need to adjust our budget. But like in the typical year, obviously a little more dramatic this year, this is our proposed budget that we're operating under, knowing that the final budget will be amended based on what the state ultimately approves. Like I said, it plans on level funding. We still believe we've been able to prioritize some needed investments, but much more, we've identified more that we would pursue should additional funding become available. So if you scroll to the next slide, just to reiterate the kind of the different scenarios we talked through, on the left-hand side, you'll see our 2020 budget. The middle line, it was that $14.6 million increase in local funding that would have been received from both state and city sources had the governor's proposed budget been approved. Because we don't anticipate that full budget being approved, what we'll talk through tonight is our proposed budget, which is the no state or city increase. So we shared this last time, but I think it's worth reiterating how we make our budget decisions. So first is prioritizing investments that are critical foundations for future district improvement. So again, those align with the items or areas identified in the turnaround action plan, which is supporting excellence in learning and high quality support for our high needs students, increased instructional capacity and resources pushed to our schools, and then activities to support world-class talent. Where we need to make reductions, we do so in ways that minimize impact on student learning. And given the world we're in, we are having to prepare for economic uncertainty where we have to. So that's how we, even in a world where we have a level funding, those are how we approach both the areas we think are just non-negotiable investments, as well as areas we might need to make reductions. So I wanted to highlight a few things, and some of these will cross over to what we talked about in our CRP. And I think because some of these investments involved being creative, both in tapping into philanthropic dollars, as well as other things for one-time investments that we believe are critical. So the first and foremost is investing in high quality K-6 ELA curriculum district-wide. And what you've seen in the contracts today and in previous sessions are really a deep investment in our ELA curriculum and others by pulling together funding from both FY20 and FY21 and from local and non-local sources. And much of this is one time. And so while we are not facing significant increases next year, we are able to pull together one-time funds to make investments that are sorely needed in the district. We shared last time about this investment we're making in terms of opening additional classrooms to support multilingual learners who arrive throughout the school year. So if you recall, we historically have had challenges in as students arrive throughout the year, finding them fast and appropriate placements. And because we have a significant number of students, primarily our multilingual learners at grades 4, 5, and 9, who enter throughout the year. So using some historical enrollment data, we made some projections on areas that we would need to add additional classrooms. So these decisions had to be made in January and February when we were building our staffing plans for schools. But we, again, believe this is a core investment to ensure we are better serving our multilingual learners. We're partnering with RIPTA to expand bus eligibility. So that is something that is still in process, but we believe kind of collectively we'll be able to increase eligibility for high school students for next year in terms of obtaining RIPTA passes. Like we mentioned in the CRP presentation, we've also been able to identify through philanthropic dollars and federal dollars funds to support 125 teachers in obtaining their ESL certification. So if you'll recall, earlier this year, we changed a large number of our positions in our elementary schools primarily to ensure we were serving students in more inclusive settings. And this required supporting our teachers as they obtain that additional certification required to teach multilingual learners and their general education peers. And then lastly, in the area of pushing resources to school and those efficient systems, we increased school level discretionary spending by 40K. While obviously a small number in the grand scheme of things, this was in the world where we were reducing central office non-personnel spending by about 400K. So even though it was a small increase, we were proud not to have to cut into the kind of the school discretionary dollars, even as we face some pretty severe economic challenges with our anticipated flat revenue for next year. This slide will also be familiar to you. It's one we shared last time and one the superintendent can speak to on Wednesday if people want more information. But as we were, originally in the spring when we received the governor's budget, we wanted to identify all the priorities and how we would prioritize spending with the additional dollars. And so here were some pretty clear cut, and if the superintendent I think could speak pretty eloquently on that. Many of these things are the bare minimum expectations in other districts, but these are investments that we are still needing to make as we enter turnaround. So to highlight a few of these, again, they're aligned to areas of our turnaround action plan that we believe are critical for district transformation. The first is increasing the number of, I'll highlight just a few rather than going line by line. But around coherent academic vision, it's investing in coaching both at the middle and high school level. We're fortunate that we have coaches at our elementary level, But we know for some of, really to support some of that deep curriculum implementation that we'll be doing, really having a need for additional coaches at the middle and secondary level. Around student supports, this is ensuring a minimum of 1 social worker per school was one investment, as well as assessment and translation services required by the DOJ. So we have been able to increase assessment and translation services for FY21, but we know there's a even greater need that we would invest further in should funding become available. If we go to the next slide, just to highlight a few of the other areas around world-class talent, these are investing in our principal pipelines and other teacher pipelines to improve the talent, both at the teacher and administrator level in the district. We've been able to make some headway here and are partnering with some other organizations to figure out, particularly as we develop some pipeline programs for our teacher assistants, that this is an area that we know we've made some progress, but much more to do. Lastly, I would say we're identifying and enhancements to the district's data warehouse, knowing that we want to increase data-driven decision-making at the school level and at the central office level. And then restoring previous levels of investment in instructional technology and hardware to ensure technology is functioning correctly. So we have made, in preparation for next year, some pretty significant one-time purchases to support both the kind of replacement and breakage that we anticipate, but also knowing that we'll have a deeper need potentially for technology for next year. However, this would be a kind of more sustainable long-term increase to our local budget, so that it wouldn't be based on kind of the one-time purchase we're having to make out of surplus dollars or out of stimulus funds. Here's where we talk about expenditure reduction. So if you recall, last time we had the kind of natural expenditure growth from year to year based on natural salary increases for collective bargaining agreements that we've already agreed to, based on major service contracts like Aramark and First Student. That kind of natural growth is roughly translates to a $5 million increase. And then we identified that $1 million investment we made in increasing the number of EL classrooms, and that's where we get to this $6 million figure. And when we last spoke, we had talked about deficit reduction activities, and we kind of had two sets of those that we would implement to close, depending on where the budget settled. And so given that we are projecting flat revenue, we had to pursue some fairly aggressive deficit reduction activities. So the first is a district reorganization. So doing a central office reorganization that resulted in some fairly significant personnel reductions in the central office. And unfortunately, also some reductions at the school level, including the closure of Evolutions, which resulted in some personnel savings, as well as the culture coordinator positions at our middle schools. In addition to those kind of district reorganization items, we were pursuing some other deficit reduction activities, including reducing non-personnel spending in central office, closing underutilized or vacant non-teaching positions that had been vacant or not fully utilized historically, insourcing some of our out of district transportation. So we have a statewide contract that supports some of our out of district students, many of whom or a handful go to schools right across the Providence line. And so after doing some analysis, we believe that running it off our First Student contract will actually be able to save money versus if we were to keep it on the statewide. And then a few other reductions related to contracts and class reduction. The two last items that I'd highlight are salary reductions via work share. So the district has implemented over this past month, in partnership with the Department of Labor and Training, a work share program that allows the district to reduce spending with some softening of kind of the impact to employees, and coupled with some of the federal stimulus dollars, we were able to save money in a way that was not as impactful or detrimental to our employees, and it helped us avoid helped us avoid further layoffs and disruption. We also had to take the step of a non-union salary freeze. So that was for any non-union staff, holding on both a cost of living increase as well as a natural step increase. The last number you'll see there is a FY20 fund transfer. So that is based on some savings that we saw, or some surplus that we saw in FY20, being able to roll that over to cover FY21. That is not ideal because that is kind of one-time funds, but one we felt necessary to avoid further disruptions to the district. So some pretty significant cuts here to get to roughly $5 million in savings, plus that one-time $1 million fund transfer. So, unprecedented, but we're frankly in unprecedented times. So we feel good that we were able to do much of this without having to do face teacher layoffs like many other districts have. But these decisions were not made lightly, and we know even as we tried to avoid disruption, any time you're making some of these changes, there will be disruption. So we think it's the right plan in place, but involved a number of tough decisions.
Mr. Scott, can I just ask a question? And I know that trying to close a budget gap is never fun business, but are there any risks of us not getting level funded? I mean, we hear these horror stories about state budget, municipal budget, and what that looks like. I know that there is on law that there has to be some level funding, but so I guess to my bigger question is, so what happens if some revenues that we're anticipating aren't coming in, right? So there were some slight increases in our budget. Is there kind of like a plan B for further reductions, I guess, number one? And then let us do the flip of that and say that there is an infusion of cash. Is there a prioritization of how we would go back in and fund these different activities? Are we going with school supports first and then move our way up to central administration? Is that what the plan is, the game plan is?
Yeah, I'll start with the probably the easier one, which is if there was a cash infusion. So the investments we highlighted on that other slide would be those priorities. Now within those we prioritize. That will depend on a number of things. But I think in any of those we want to prioritize. I think the challenge is going to be, it depends if that cash infusion is a one-time thing or is it if it's ongoing, right? Because as you've mentioned time and time again, if we get a one-time infusion by buying. Putting it all into personnel that is only a 1-year stopgap would not be good. So it's going to. So I think ideally, if we do get if it's not a one-time infusion, we would use those investments. In those investments, we'd have to prioritize among those in terms of depending on how much we received. Should there be a decline in revenue? We'll have to make some very tough choices. I think the challenge is we are doing this at the same time we are adding up all the investments we need to make to just support reentry. And so, how we can't, if we were kind of hyper conservative here and held back a lot of money, I just don't think, it could impact our ability to reopen. So we would have to make some pretty dramatic, depending on what those reductions are. We'd either have to seek additional revenue sources or consider how we do big things like transportation and otherwise how we do some of those things differently for next year, because it will be a challenge if we face some pretty severe reductions below level funding.
Okay. And as far as there have not been any of those conversations to have those provisions in place. We're fairly confident that level funding will be our mainstay for fiscal year 21. Is that accurate so far? I mean, that's what I've been hearing. I'm assuming you've been hearing the same thing.
Yeah, we have not heard more. And when we've talked about our plan to be level funded, I think people, when we've talked with other stakeholders, that seems like a reasonable approach. I haven't say that there's any indication that it's going to be a whole lot better, a whole lot worse, but I think we'll wait and see. And some of that, frankly, I'm sure is dependent not only on what the state is able to do, but what the federal government is able to do in terms of future stimulus. So I think we'll have to, if we face further reductions, there'll be some, much more difficult decisions we need to make.
All right. And so again, for what we know right now, we feel that this is a reasonable budget. to put forward?
Yes, correct.
Based on the current assumptions. Okay,
Yes.
great, thank you.
So I think there might be a slide or two more. This is just to highlight some of the things that we've been doing, not really financially related, but we've still been able to, I think we've been excited to make progress on despite everything going on. So that has been a few things to highlight, has been moving up our teacher hiring timeline, which we've seen when you compare kind of vacancies year to year, even with all the disruption and uncertainty, when you take snapshots in time, we are well below where we were in prior years. And so there's a lot more work to do, but we feel good that we've seen some results from our moving up our teacher hiring timeline. As this committee is aware, we've developed a new procurement system that allows us to kind of tier tier procurement requests. Allows us, as you know, Molly's does a fantastic job of ensuring we're aligned and with all state regs, while also doing this in a way that can get goods and services to schools and departments more quickly. In consultation with RIDE or through RIDE's leadership, we've launched a teacher recruitment campaign to attract highly qualified and diverse educators that we believe has been helpful in bringing in more candidates to the district. The superintendent and the rest of our leadership team has held multiple community forums to support both the kind of turnaround plan, but also distance learning and our reopening efforts. And then next, which I'll talk a little bit more in detail, is part of this reorganization. I think it's important to note, while it's comes up in a budget conversation as a way to reduce spending, it was also a way to better align what we think are supports to our schools. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the highlights of that reorganization plan, because it is not just about cost savings. It's about making sure the central office is better aligned to support schools. So if we turn to the next slide, I think that may be the last one, and then I can answer questions that people have. So just to highlight a few of the priorities here, one was streamlining our operational divisions, including HR, finance, and central supply, and that is doing a few things. It's in areas where we thought we could make reductions to save money and money that would be better served either closing our deficit and protecting our schools from any cuts, or freeing up dollars to make investments. We made those choices here. I would also say in most cases we are realigning roles so that they're more focused on schools. So we have liaisons that have in HR or finance have a network of schools that they're supporting versus just supporting a specific function or business process. So this allows, from my experience in other districts, leads to better customer service and support for our schools. We did reduce total headcount in the central office, resulting in 25 plus FTE reduction, which wasn't easy for a number of reasons, given the challenging times we find ourselves in. We were able to implement a retirement incentive for our members of our 1339, which is a clerical union, which helped avoid when we do some of these reductions, it can result in people bumping into other positions or displacing people. And so through that retirement incentive, we were able to see minimal disruption to our schools, which is always a goal. And then I think another, maybe the most important part of this reorganization was moving many positions from our central office departments to school-based network teams that take a multi-pronged approach to school support. So that is supporting schools from a variety of angles, including instruction, special education and multilingual learner supports, school culture and equity, data, and family and constituent support. So to give you like a feel for what that means, right? Many of these functions live across or have historically lived across the central office, and they kind of a school leader is working, he or she needs to go to a variety of departments to get support. In this world, these folks are aligned under their network superintendent, who then can deploy those individuals to support schools and better make sure they're working together rather than kind of working in silos. So a lot of work to do to operationalize that, but I think we have the good nuts and bolts of that network structure to better support schools. And then key to this is identifying some top talent to fill key network roles in whether that's in network superintendent. That includes getting the best of the best internally, as well as from other parts of the country. So Still some active recruitment going on, but some, I think some promising first steps. So with that, I'm happy to take questions that people have about the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. So questions by the school board members, and just for the board members that are with us today, I just want to draw your attention to the appendix section of the document, which gives you the line items that we had already previously reviewed when we passed our initial budget, knowing that we would be revisiting this conversation, not only just today, but I would anticipate we would revisit this conversation sometime after August when the General Assembly enacts their full budget. And so know that this is an iterative conversation. As we learn more, the district tries to respond responsibly to what we have in front of us. And so essentially what we're looking at is reducing the initial budget that we approved by nearly $6 million, Mr. Scott. Is that correct? The reductions that you're looking at are just shy of $6 million for the new budget amount.
Yeah, with a slight caveat that is closer to 5 million with the 1 million.
With the
1 million carryover. So the actual reductions are closer to 5
million. Correct. Thank you for the clarification. So questions by the school board. And if we can take this to slide 3, Sine, I think this really helps us with understanding what that impact of no state or city increases looks like in terms of revenues. And then we've backed into the budget to make sure that we're level funded at that dollar range. So any questions by school board members?
Madam Chair, this is Kinzel. I'm just curious if the district is hearing any chatter from the city or regards to when a decision will be made in terms of a budget, so we have a clear picture of which direction we're going in.
You broke up just a little there, Mr.
Yeah, Mr. Thomas, do you want to restate that? You were breaking up. And again, I'm going to remind folks to put themselves on mute so we can try to avoid a lot of the background noise. So, Mr. Thomas, I'm going to have you re-ask your question, please.
Sure. Can you hear me a little clearer now?
Yes.
Perfect. So I was just asking if the district has heard any chatter from the state or city with regards to when a decision will be made, or when there will be more information with regards to funding, so we can kind of have a clearer picture of which direction we're going into. I know it's a challenge, but I'm just curious if.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and something we think is constantly. We have not heard more, updates on when that will be. I think given the Crowley Act, the city's obligation is really predicated on whether there's a state increase. So the city, at the end of the day, there's not as much decision there, but it will be triggered by any changes in the state level budget.
Okay.
And Mr. Scott, it's my understanding that they're hoping for full passage of a budget by August, but there was kind of this, again, 1 month extension until they can wrap their head around. I think our state legislative body are trying to really understand the impact of COVID-19 and how to budget responsibly for the state, as they're also trying to grapple with potential reductions on the state side. And so I believe the last I heard was they were trying to aim for a full passage of a budget in August. Is that, Mr. Scott, does that sound like what you've been hearing as well?
That sounds right. And I say this without having a ton of, this is not from any specific source, but I just know that the federal government's decisions around the stimulus ultimately impact the state feels their finances are. So I would assume there's a little bit of a domino effect on, when there's some federal movement that tells that provides some level of clarity for the states to move forward.
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing as well. And so, Mr. Thomas, I think your question is a good one, and I think I'm going to take this back to, I feel like our budget for fiscal 21 is going to be a little bit of a moving target. Over the next few months, we'll get some greater clarity on that. As we all watch what the federal government does, these stimulus monies that they've been passing do impact us locally. They impact us at the state level, but then also at a local level, particularly for a city like Providence. which a lot of times has its specific designation. So I think that this is something that we're going to revisit. Mr. Scott, I would be surprised if you don't come back to us with another version of a budget sometime. I would anticipate in September, because if Congress does act in the month of August on some other type of stimulus, we'll have to wait and see how that trickles down and impacts us here in Providence, much like what we're seeing now, almost a 2-month lag, right? So when we initially looked at this budget, it was in May for passage, and we're trying again. I think things are becoming clearer, but I would anticipate the school board looking at another budget in September of some point. And I know when the school board looked at the budget in May, June timeframe, there was a lot of ambiguity about what we passed, what we didn't. And I think this highlights exactly where we are, right? Like, we are making our best guess estimates based on assumptions that are being given to us on a day-to-day or weekly basis. And I want to reiterate that our fiscal year 21 budget, we believe, will be a little bit of a moving target for the next couple of months. So I think our responsibility is making sure that the district is prioritizing based on what is best for the students in our district. And I think that is why Mr. Scott really highlighted the areas of investments to ensure that we are having those viable curriculums that we vetted tonight, to making sure that we have the supports that are going into the schools, making sure that we have social workers and all of the resources that are needed that are closest to the child is where the district has been prioritizing those investments. And the reductions that we're seeing are happening at central administration. They're happening at levels where there are already vacancies, where we feel we can continue to operate with little to no disruption to the students in our district. And I think that is what the board is. Our role is to make sure that we continue to prioritize that, and making sure that our students are front and center and our communities are second close when we're looking at how we're spending dollars in the district. All right, any other questions or comments or thoughts by the school board? Okay. So my understanding, Mr. Scott, is you're asking for a recommendation from our committee to bring this to the board for final recommendation, given the new budget landscape that you are presenting at a level funded option. Is that my understanding?
That's correct. This is, what we know now. This is how we're planning to spend our money for FY21, fully recognizing that as additional, things come up, we may need to amend. Which happens at any year, but probably more so this year. But this is our, proposed budget for FY21.
Great. And Mr. Scott, I also believe that there are the ordinances, there's the comp and class ordinances and the appropriation ordinances that would go along with the reductions that you've seen or the additions that you've seen. That is also before us, and the school board is still acting on those recommendations tonight. So, Mr. Scott, I'm wondering if we can just highlight those. I've had a chance to review them and kind of do a little bit of a crosswalk on some of this. I did not find any questions on any of those ordinances, but what I'd like to do is have our school board members look at the compensation ordinance, classification ordinance, and appropriation. If we can just quickly pull those up, because then I'd like to vote on this as one full package for you to then bring to the full board. All right, so why don't we take a look at the compensation? You have the appropriations ordinance, I think, up first. And yes. So if you look at the appropriations, that is now reflective of the new total of our budget that has been presented in front of us.
Yes, so this is our appropriation. So essentially the categorization of how we are our spending plan for next year. So this first page has it at a high level across a number of areas. So no surprises. Like many school districts, salaries and benefits are a big line item of our budget. And as a reminder, y'all know this, but for those who are on the call who may not, this is our local budget. So it's just, it doesn't include all the federal dollars and other sources of funds, but it's just our state and city funding.
Right. So none of the consolidated plan that we just looked at, the roughly 21 million of federal dollars, those are those title dollars.
That's right.
All told, that brings us to our total budget again. So this is state and city dollars that would be enacted through these ordinances.
Correct.
Which is why the total sum of 397 million, or roughly 398 million, looks smaller than the actual budget that Mr. Scott put in front of us, which was north of $400 million.
Correct. That's correct.
All right. Any questions on the appropriations?
questions here, Madam.
Okay. Madam Clerk, can you bring up the compensation ordinance for us, please?
Yeah, so this highlights, and I think it'll be because of our reorganization of central office. There's a fair bit of changes here, but this is our FTEs by title and by department. So you'll see with some colors that help identify funding source. It's in a similar format to what we presented in years past. We just noted here the reorganization on the right-hand side because it's such a change that we wanted to make sure we could highlight some of the major changes here. But these, I would say, just to clarify, this is compared to our ordinance from last year. So there were some changes, I think, that had happened over the course of the year that are reflected here. It's not just changes that happened later as part of what I think of as kind of the spring reorganization, but it captures all the different changes we had by department and by title.
Great. Any questions by school board members? And just as a point of clarification, this is the classification ordinance, not the compensation ordinance. I apologize. I believe I had talked about the compensation ordinance. So this is the classification ordinance that's before us right now.
Correct.
And so if there's no questions on the classification ordinance, Madam Clerk, I'm going to ask you to pull up the compensation ordinance, please. And Mr. Scott, if you want to speak to this, please.
Sure. So compensation ordinance gives you the salary ranges for different positions. Many of those are part of one of our labor unions. So those salary ranges are dictated by our contracts, and any collective bargaining cost of living increase that a bargaining unit may be entitled to. So you'll see, to highlight a few things, our non-union staff, like we had mentioned, the salaries were frozen. So you'll see those ranges largely stayed the same. As part of the reorganization, we did add, different titles, new positions. And so, we paid careful attention to other similar positions in the district to ensure that anytime we're establishing new positions, we're compensating those roles in a similar way to what other kind of roles are compensated in the district. So this helps us just as we are going through the year, hiring individuals, ensuring we're following consistent compensation practices.
Any questions by board members on the compensation ordinance?
I have questions, Madam Chair.
Mr. Ibiemi, any questions from you?
I have no questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, so if there's no additional questions by the school board members, Mr. Scott, anything else you want to add before I call for a vote?
Not at this time, no.
Okay, thank you very much. So if there's no further questions, I will entertain a motion to recommend passage of our fiscal year 21 budget as presented tonight, again, with the assumptions that we have, the reasonable assumptions that we believe, along with the compensation ordinance, the fiscal year 21 compensation ordinance, the fiscal year 21 classification ordinance, and the fiscal year 21 appropriations ordinance. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It has been moved by Mr. Thomas. Is there a second?
Second.
It has been seconded by Mr. Ibiemi. Again, any additional questions or comments? Okay, I just want to thank Mr. Scott, Mr. Patisi, who I know is not on the call, Ms. Generali, Ms. Hanna, and everybody who has worked hard to try to look at this budget. I know that this has not been an easy year for predicting budgets, and I want to thank you all for your diligence, your patience, and keeping an eye on making sure that our students come first as we prioritize the dollars that we're spending in the district. So thank you all very much. I know, Mr. Scott, you've been leading the way, and I appreciate the way that you've approached our budgeting cycle this year. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, any abstentions? The ayes carry. That concludes all of our agenda items for tonight's Finance Committee meeting. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Thomas. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Ibiemi. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to thank all of the members of our school district who were here to present. We will see you on Wednesday for our full school board meeting.
Thank you so much, Madam
Good night,
Chair.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Right.
Mhm.